Team, any objections to getting started? Okay, if everyone would please keep themselves muted, and we'll get started. Welcome to the Statewide Plastics Monitoring Public Meeting. And if we go to the next slide. Some real quick kind of housekeeping. The agenda is we're going to have introductions from the team. We're going to have some project background, a report overview, and public comment or a question period. The purpose of this is really to direct people to the document itself, to encourage folks to read it, to provide comments in areas that they have opinions or concerns, and to do that in writing. We've all found that sometimes when it's stream of consciousness kinds of things in a public meeting and you're doing summaries, it's harder to have clarification or whatnot, but when you have written comments, especially if they're longer or more substantive, that's the most effective way to get them in. But wanted to have this public meeting. If folks have questions, or if folks are just becoming aware of this, to give at least an orientation and direct people of where to go. So that's how the meeting will go today. And the next slide. Some meeting guidelines. Please hold your questions until after the presentation. You're going to hear from folks. And we'll have information about the comments. We'll put everything in the chat, asking for a deadline for written comments. I can quickly consult. It's the 11th of March. Also, raise your Zoom hand to ask a question, or you can put it in the chat if you're not comfortable talking. You put in the chat. We'll get through as much as we can today. It's a limited amount of time. That's why there are these other options where you can do things online, or you can write an email if you have follow-up questions. Encourage people to be concise versus having sort of a stream of consciousness moment at the meeting. And then again, please submit detailed comments or questions via the project website. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kyla from OPC, who will introduce herself and her team. Oh, and I'll start with me before I do that. Marie Rainwater. I do public engagement, process design, facilitation, mediation, strategic planning kinds of things, mostly in the environmental arena. So Kyla.
Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Kyla Kelly. I'm the Water Quality Program Manager for the Ocean Protection Council, and I manage OPC's work on both micro and macro plastics, among other water quality concerns. And I'll hand it over to Diana and the SFEI team to introduce themselves.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. So glad to see everyone here. I'm Diana Lynn. I'm a Managing Senior Scientist at the San Francisco Estuary Institute. San Francisco Estuary Institute, we're a nonprofit science organization, and we seek to provide objective visionary science so that policymakers and communities can make informed decisions to protect healthy ecosystems and communities. And I lead the microplastics focus area for the Institute, as well as for the regional monitoring program for the San Francisco Bay, and have led several microplastic studies.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Tony Hale. I work alongside Diana at the San Francisco Estuary Institute, serving as Program Director for Environmental Informatics. That translates to the outside world as the head technologist there. As such, I lead several teams and co-lead the data analysis subcommittee for the Water Quality Monitoring Council's trash monitoring work group. So that's where you may know me. I also co-wrote, along with Shelley Moore, the trash monitoring playbook. So very good to see you all, and welcome to this meeting. Kyla?
All right, yeah, we're going to dive into a little bit of background before getting to the report. I'm sure that many of you here know that plastics, both macro and micro, are ubiquitous in the marine and coastal environments. They're often ingested by marine life, causing harmful impacts to both individual species and food webs. They've also been found in humans, both in the stool, lungs, placenta samples, indicating that there is potential for human health impacts. Scientific knowledge on health impacts from plastic exposure is rapidly growing, but California-specific information is currently limited. Next slide, please. While plastic pollution has been increasing exponentially, the continued proliferation of plastic pollution in the marine and coastal environment is not a foregone conclusion. We can take measures and exercise control over our generation of plastic pollution, and California has made some really important strides towards curbing this type of pollution. Next slide, please. Okay, so California has a history of addressing plastic pollution, from local source reduction efforts to statewide efforts. At the state level, several agencies have implemented policy and worked together to reduce plastic pollution. The list here on this slide is by no means exhaustive, but I'll highlight a few key examples. In 2015, the State Water Resources Control Board implemented regulations to address trash flowing from urban environments to aquatic ecosystems through the statewide trash amendments. In 2018, the legislature directed state agencies to develop a statewide microplastic strategy to protect aquatic ecosystems. This document was published in 2022, and since then, multiple agencies have been working to implement the strategy. The same year, the legislature directed the water boards to monitor microplastics in drinking water, given growing human health concerns. In 2022, again, the legislature passed a Plastic Pollution Prevention and Packaging Producer Responsibility Act, which aims to tackle plastic pollution by requiring cover materials to be recyclable through regulations that are being implemented by CalRecycle. And finally, in 2024, the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, or OEHA, was directed by the legislature to develop guidelines for safe levels of microplastics in drinking water. So these are just a few examples. Not listed here are several state and local bans on plastic items such as microbeads, plastic bags, straws, etc. So in summary, these are some of the major ways that the state is working to address plastic pollution. Next slide, please. So today we're here to talk about the statewide plastics monitoring strategy and planning framework. And before we dive in, I want to demonstrate the importance of monitoring and its intersection with past and future California policies. In 2014, the legislature passed SB 270, Senate Bill 270, which banned plastic bags at checkout. The Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, or SCWRP, the regional monitoring program, collected data in the Southern California Bight in 2013 and 2018 and found that there were fewer plastic bags in the ocean after the ban compared to before. So this plastic bag ban was effective in reducing this type of ocean trash, and it shows that policies like these do work. So this demonstrates the importance of data collection or monitoring to track efficacy of policy solutions and local investment to prevent plastic pollution. And I'll dive into some of these other benefits of monitoring on the next slide too. So next slide, please. So yeah, as I mentioned, California has several policies to reduce and prevent the flow of trash into California waters, and other efforts to prevent proliferation of plastic waste. And some monitoring occurs at the regional level, yet we lack a consistent plastic monitoring program across the state. Having this statewide monitoring program is important for a number of reasons. We can establish a baseline of understanding of plastic contamination in state aquatic environments. Then with continued monitoring, establish trends in how that changes over time. We can investigate the impacts of this contamination to both humans and ecosystems. We can track the state's progress in reducing plastic pollution, like the plastic bag ban, evaluating the efficacy of some of the programs I listed on the previous slide. And we can examine the community benefits of successful management actions as well. Finally, we can use this data to inform future management efforts and policies. So this strategy and planning framework that we're going to talk about today will inform the development of a consistent, coordinated plastics monitoring program and network that will help California further address the plastic pollution problem. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to SFEI to talk about the strategy.
Thanks. So as Kyla said, SFEI's task for this project is to develop a report that will help guide future statewide plastics monitoring program. But before I jump in, I wanted to quickly define macroplastics and microplastics. In the report, we simply define macroplastic debris as plastics trash that is larger than 5 millimeters in size, and this is consistent with water quality regulations regarding the discharge of trash. And microplastics are tiny pieces of plastics and fibers that are smaller than 5 millimeter and can be invisible to the naked eye due to their small size. And mostly these are generated from the breakdown of larger plastic items, such as plastic debris breaking down into tiny pieces or fibers shedding from our clothing. Excuse me, a little croaky this morning. So in the report, we outline a 10-year vision as well as our goals and objectives for monitoring. And we have a separate monitoring strategy addressing macroplastics and microplastics. And we quickly realized that we needed separate strategies for these different size categories at this time because the methods for monitoring are so different. The regulatory landscape is different. Therefore, our information needs to inform those regulations and policies are different, as well as the practitioners who might be doing the monitoring are very different between macroplastics and microplastics. In the report, we also outline our recommendations for how to implement the monitoring strategy in a phased approach. So we expect the plan to continue to adapt based on what groups are leading the implementation, as well as what we learned from pilot monitoring studies. So the first year of the project involved gathering broad input to help understand what questions are we trying to answer with a statewide monitoring strategy. And we wanted to understand what state agencies and programs and communities and public individuals, what are their concerns regarding plastic pollution? So we hosted a request for public comment to gather public input from individuals and community organizations to understand concerns about plastics. We had several meetings with representatives from various state and federal agencies to understand what their programs do in regards to managing plastic debris and what questions they have that a statewide monitoring program could help inform. And we also gathered 10 experts on trash and microplastics monitoring to help provide scientific guidance throughout the development of our report. And a big part of this process was trying to prioritize what are the most important questions, articulating study questions that we could inform through monitoring. So based on this input, we defined our goals for this monitoring strategy, and this is to try to understand the exposure, impacts, and management of plastic pollution. So more specifically, we're trying to understand the levels of macroplastics and microplastics contamination in aquatic ecosystems to inform risk and evaluate impacts. And here we're focusing on aquatic ecosystems as this is a priority for the Ocean Protection Council, and aquatic ecosystems end up being the sink for most of our plastic pollution. And some examples of understanding risk and impacts is trying to understand what are the potential health impacts from ingestion of microplastics for aquatic wildlife, as well as from humans ingesting seafood containing microplastics. And all of this monitoring is meant to inform management action. So how can we prevent plastic debris from reaching the oceans and aquatic ecosystems, either by reducing plastic waste or capturing it before it escapes? And so what monitoring can do is help us identify the sources to inform what to do about them, and then track progress in reducing plastic pollution to evaluate the efficacy of ongoing management actions and inform future management actions. So in this report, we define these goals and objectives in the frame of management monitoring questions because they're framed as questions that water quality managers need to inform policies and regulations. So for example, I would reframe our first statement as what are the levels of microplastics in California surface waters? And then we can define specific monitoring studies where we're trying to measure microplastic levels in specific water bodies. So our report is organized into 6 sections, starting with the introduction that provides the background, motivation, and goals and objectives of our monitoring strategy. Then the next 2 sections cover microplastics, and then sections 4 and 5, 4 and 5 cover macroplastics that Tony will cover later. And then data management principles covers both microplastics and macroplastics. So in section 2, I have 4 major sections. Management monitoring questions, again, is our way of framing our goals and objectives for our microplastics monitoring strategy. Then we describe the state of the science for sampling and analysis methods for microplastics, as microplastics is very much a developing science. And we provide our recommendations for how to use current available methods to answer specific study questions. Then we have a broad list of potential monitoring program partners that could be part of a future statewide plastics monitoring program. And here we really try to be inclusive as OPC envisions this to leverage a wide, diverse network of partners to implement monitoring. And so this is meant to be inclusive as potential partners to coordinate with. And then we provide some locations and geographic considerations, again, trying to provide recommendations for specific study questions. And then in the next section, we describe a phased approach to monitoring implementation, starting with pilot phase and things that we could do in the future as we learned from the pilot earlier phases. So starting with the pilot monitoring program, we describe special studies that can be implemented immediately, leveraging ongoing water quality programs, as well as current available methods. And here we focus our pilot monitoring recommendations on urban impacted ecosystems, thinking that these are likely to be worst case scenarios and areas where we're most likely to see risk and impacts from microplastics. Then we talk about monitoring information needs that can be implemented both in the near term and long term. And here we're trying to prioritize our information needs as well as the developing science as we learn from this process. So as methods improve, we can expand our monitoring efforts. And we envision future monitoring to include fish and shellfish monitoring to understand human health risks from ingesting fish and shellfish containing microplastics, and importantly, pathways monitoring to help us identify the sources of microplastic pollution. And we also recommend developing a standardized reporting framework and data management system for managing all of this monitoring data. So here now, I'll turn it over to Tony to cover sections 4 and 5 for macroplastics.
Thank you very much, Diana. So what Diana's described is the microplastics focus, and what proceeds from there in sections 4 and 5 is an emphasis on the macroplastics side of things. It's already been defined, but of course, macroplastics are the larger items. It follows, what you find in the structure is that it follows a similar structure to the microplastic sections. However, it also recognizes that trash and plastics monitoring have been ongoing for decades across the state. And so the section begins with a review of the background on plastics and trash policies and actions. We can go to the next slide. Yes, thank you. And then from there, its structure does mirror the microplastics outline described by Diana, with an emphasis on relevant management and monitoring questions, the sampling and analysis methods, many of which are drawn from the trash monitoring playbook that I mentioned earlier in my introduction. Also, the potential program partners, which are numerous, considering that that trash and plastics monitoring has been happening across the state, as I mentioned, and finally ending with location and geographic considerations. So that is the strategy, and then section 5 describes implementation, similarly to the microplastics focus. However, it also emphasizes the need to leverage and coordinate existing monitoring efforts, with the recognition that the macroplastics monitoring is often part and parcel of broader trash monitoring. So the phased implementation begins with a pilot, and what you see there with the arrow pointing to the pilot is what is called, and we can go to the next slide, please. The first thing to be tested as part of that pilot is the plastics material coefficient. What that is, it's a series of big words, but really what it is seeking to determine is what portion of the unmanaged trash found in the environment is actually plastic. So as we know from experience out there in the world, you can see trash that is often different materials, but there is some portion of it that is the plastic bottles, plastic bags, other materials that are plastic. So determining whether this figure offers some regularity will also determine its application to trash data analysis. Its primary value is that it offers ways to compare trash assessments across geographical differences and across programs. So that's the what we're calling the PMC, or the plastic materials coefficient. But also is the need to coordinate these different existing programs focusing on source identifications in aquatic and marine environments, which, as we learned from our work with the state advisory committee, it is a common management concern. So as coordination increases, so must data management tools and to assist with quality control and open data distribution. So Section 6, and we can Section 6 advocates for data practices and principles to ensure that data collection, analysis, and interpretation align to promote openness of information. So it emphasizes FAIR principles. FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And you often see these principles cited in state data projects. And these principles are meant to encourage the maximum level of transparency with any sort of data project that is happening. Furthermore, the data principles section also encourages continued investments in communication and coordination. This is very much a human enterprise within the context of a technical endeavor, that you do need to make sure that people are effectively communicating and coordinating things like their controlled vocabularies and different taxonomies to ensure that people are identifying the same materials in the same way. But also, there's no getting around the need for continued investment in technical infrastructure, leveraging existing resources, whether technical or training resources, and other existing committees and organizational bodies, as well as really thinking carefully about the mandates and incentives for sharing data, for sharing information, and for sharing wisdom and lessons learned. So all of these things fall under the Section 6, the data principles section. With that, I will turn it over to Marie.
Would help if I unmuted. Great. I know there's a little background noise on my mic, so I'm trying to stay muted. Thanks everybody for a great presentation. And now we can turn it over for questions. And I think our team's going to put the link to the website where, there you go, they're reading my mind. So folks can click on that, make it easily available right now. Nobody has a hand up right now, but are there questions? The team did such a thorough job, there are no questions? Okay, I assume everybody knows that you just raise that little hand if, okay, great. Susan, thank you. You have the floor, Susan.
So I do my best to stay on top of various reports that the San Francisco Estuary Institute puts out. Sometimes when I do a Google search, I don't always find the most recent stuff, but eventually I do. Anyway, long story short, in the last thing that I read, there was a statement saying that up to as much as 50% of microplastics found at this point in the San Francisco Bay come from tires or from asphalt, runoff. Can you speak a little bit to that? How changeable do you expect that to be as you improve your methods going forward?
Yeah, just a little bit clarification on that. In our report, our San Francisco Bay microplastic study, we saw lots of black rubbery particles in stormwater runoff, and over half of the particles were these rubbery particles that we were able to identify as tire wear particles. But these methods, the quantification methods are kind of still developing, and so as we improve our methods, we can improve kind of really what proportion of the microplastics in the bay is microplastics. The interesting thing about tire wear particles is that they don't float. compared to other types of mussels. They're much more dense. And so depending on what part of the bay that you're looking at, you will see more or less tire wear particles. And in terms of management actions to address tire wear, it is challenging, but there are a lot of efforts to reduce tire wear, like basically efforts to reduce vehicle miles traveled, efforts on improving tires so that they wear less. All of those different types of efforts can reduce tire wear emissions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Other questions?
We have a question from Christina Van Dyke in the chat. Do you see that, Marie?
Great. Yes. The question is, how might this framework inform statewide or local policy bands? So you're hitting the nail on the head. Team? Who wants to answer?
I can go first, and then
Okay, great.
SFEI, please feel free to add. So yeah, we really envision this, the data and information we get from monitoring to help inform more targeted solutions to the plastic pollution problem. So, this could look like identifying hotspots or areas that are most impacted by trash or microplastics to prioritize intervention in those areas. But then, we could also do something like have better identification of sources of microplastics to see where upstream interventions might be most effective as well. So that's how we envision this information being most useful to the state and others working on these efforts. Anything to add, SFEI?
I'll add something very quick on the focus of macroplastics. So if you have the report open and turn to page 59, you will see an articulation of different management questions that are meant to be addressed through the strategy. The one that I will cite, I'm going to go ahead and it's not going to look great in the chat, but it's going to look really kind of a little bit weird, but just so you have the visual. Are plastic levels changing over time? How effective are the mitigation measures and regulatory controls? What are management actions that could drive changes in macroplastic levels in California surface waters? So this, boiling down to these management questions, was part of the process of working with the state agency group as well as the technical advisory committee. From these, what we would call management questions, management of natural resources, management of engineered solutions, the program really needs to focus on these management questions and ensure that all of the different smaller and highly resolved monitoring questions that might be more geographically focused. It might be how is this local bag ban having an effect on things that we find in our local creeks? That's over a given period of time. Those are the types of monitoring questions that you would want to form and refine further before it gets actionable in the field. But I want to point out that that question is absolutely, I think, relevant to the types of things that this program is meant to address. So thank you.
Okay, so we've got Diane, you're next, and then we'll come back to the couple of questions that have been added. You got to thank you there, team, for the answer. Diane, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you. Your 50% tire crumb found in 12 different hotspots around the bay is consistent with findings on research that was done in Toronto, where they found that actually 50% of the tire crumb was from synthetic turf fields, and it was second only to trash that was found in the waterways. I'm wondering, and this has also been an issue that has been found in multiple other research studies from around the world. And in addition, other studies have been able to quantify synthetic turf blades at between 12 and 15% of the mesoplastics found in waterways and our oceans. And this timeline that you're proposing is not consistent with the urgency of the matter. We're finding, research has been showing that we are inhaling microplastics in our sea spray. It's obviously impacting aquatic organisms as well as other wildlife. And when California is rolling out 1,100 acres of synthetic turf fields per year, the equivalent of 870 replacements or new installations on top of what is already existing annually. I'm wondering what we can do to speed up this timeline, and how can you leverage research done from around the world to enhance your process and your timeline? Thank you.
Kyla, do you have a initial response, or is it SFDI?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. We do acknowledge the urgent need, and I think a lot of things are happening simultaneously at the state, from the Extended Producer Responsibility Act that's being rolled out, and other plastic issues. And I know that's not specifically turf, but um, you know, I just want to acknowledge the simultaneous efforts that are happening, while also this monitoring comes on board to inform future things as well. But Diana, do you want to add any other specifics
Yeah, I
about
just
turf?
wanted to thank you for your comments, and yeah, we totally agree on the urgency. I guess the scope of this was to develop a statewide monitoring strategy, but we also coordinate really closely with Department of Toxic Substance Control, and they are looking at their Safer Consumer program is very aware of concerns about tire crumb and PFAS from the artificial turf, like grass blades and stuff. And so, yes, and the scope of our work is meant to focus on the monitoring.
Okay, anything else in answer? All right, then we'll go back to the written questions. The next one, I believe, was Robert Hall. Will microplastics with the worst chemicals like 6-PPD-Q or DEPH be prioritized in monitoring or sorted out somehow? So, team?
Yeah, so we definitely recognize that tire particles are a big source of microplastics, and that they contain lots of chemical contaminants. And so that is part of our monitoring strategy, is to be inclusive of tire particles in monitoring, as sometimes they require different sampling and analytical methods.
Okay, the next up is Maureen Wise's question. She works at a coastal Southern California water district and manages a network of urban treatment wetlands. They also monitor pounds of trash removed from our watershed that is collected in our sites. Are there any avenues that I can help contribute to data for this team? Right on. I think congruent with the intent of what will hopefully congeal out of this effort. Team?
Yeah, that is great. We would love to hear from you and learn about your monitoring. I think this would be incorporated as the monitoring strategy is implemented, and so this your program definitely seems to be one that we should be coordinating with.
So make sure that you go to the website and get your information in there and say you want to be on the list of organizations or agencies that can be reached out to during the implementation phase. So, okay, next from, I think it's Miho. How was environmental justice taken into consideration or included in this strategy and plan?
Tony?
Hi, Miho. Good to see you. I will mention that we did present to the EJAB, and Kyla, can you remind me of the what EJAB stands for? The Environmental Justice Advisory Board, is that correct?
Correct.
And Miho, I think you're part of that, if I'm not mistaken. So what we wanted to do in presenting to the EJAB is to get a read on how community engagement can be tuned to the needs of environmental justice. But we did bear in mind a need to focus on environmental justice in the course of the strategy, making sure that we really focused on potential impacts to communities for the types of contaminants that we are that are at the center of this strategy. And so when talking with our with the state advisory group as well as the TAC, environmental justice was discussed and was part of the information that went forward. Furthermore, as part of our community outreach initially, we did hear from a number of advocates of environmental justice, which is part of the official record found in the appendices of the document.
Okay, anything else from the team? All right, the next questions looks like it's being answered as we sit here regarding best practices when in 2026 is the SCCWRP planning to publish guidance for sampling microplastics from surface waters, and will this be part of the pilot phase? And then we've got a response to that comment from Leah. I assume everybody can read that. Is there more that anybody wants to add?
I think Leah addressed the question. Leah is speaking from the organization that's being cited here. So
yes, thank you, Tony. I should have said that.
Yes, so I'm just going to kind of confirm what Leah is saying. OPC is working with SCWRP to develop these SOPs for monitoring, and so we very much want this monitoring strategy to leverage the same SOP efforts, and so it does recommend using those SOPs.
Okay, good technical questions here. I'm glad we have diverse folks on the line. Next comment is, what's the time frame for the pilot monitoring studies? Have they already started? If so, who's doing them? So who's the lead?
I can take this one. We are hoping to get some pilot studies up and running in the next year or so, depending on how long we're working on getting. We're having conversations among the state agencies, including OPC, water boards, among others, to determine what a pilot might look like in implementing it, going off of what is suggested in the strategy. So I don't have anything more to share about that yet, but we will, make it public as we develop it more, and are actively working on developing a pilot program.
Okay, any other comments from the team? Okay, there's a couple of comments that were written here. EPR does not apply to synthetic turf. Many have submitted comments to DTSC, both on plastic turf and microplastics. So that's a comment for folks to note. Next up, we have David Schwartz. At Clean Oceans International, we conduct shoreline surveys that focus on plastic. Our surveys are mostly in the Monterey Bay and San Francisco Bay regions. Our locations and database are growing. Would you be interested in our data or hearing more about what we do and how we do it?
Yes, please submit our comment letter and tell us more. Thank you.
This is absolutely one of the goals of these kinds of meetings, if you haven't been brought into the loop to date, to get you in the loop, because there's a list of organizations that might be potential future partners and want to get that on there. So if you're not on the list and you're interested, definitely go get yourself signed up. All right, so that's all the printed comments. There are no hands up. I'll give a few more minutes if folks are cogitating.
One general observation that I want to share, whether we're talking about the specific chemicals within microplastics that may need to be that may be a focus of analysis, or a focus on turf and the impacts on the microplastics load in the environment. A lot of those priorities can and will be set in the course of implementation. What you'll notice is in the document, we've deliberately tried to leave a sufficient amount of slack and room for further deliberation as implementation goes on. Moreover, there is a principle that is adaptive management, where you begin your pilot, learn from that, making adjustments as you go, so that the next season that you get out and do your monitoring, you might change your focus, you might reset your priorities, you might adjust your methods. And so that's very much influencing kind of how we're thinking about implementation. So if we are not being specific enough about what what is to be monitored, and you're urging for more specificity and even more urgency of focus on one particular thing or another. That is a completely understandable reaction. And as part of implementation, it's part of participating in this effort going forward. We would want to hear from you, and we would want to make those what are sometimes difficult decisions of focus as we move into later phases.
Okay, so we've got another comment in the chat. In 2025, the Royal Netherlands Institute for Sea Research, and there's a link there, has come up with a way to find nanoplastics, which they use to estimate nanoplastics in the North Atlantic. Is the SFEI going to consider nanoplastics? And Diana has put a response there. The report does, in case folks are just on the phone, the report does mention the need to look at nanoplastics and also recognizes scientific methods are developing. Nanoplastics is not included in pilot monitoring phase and is mentioned for future monitoring. And then Samantha Romanik, are you interested in work from organization working on the monitoring of microplastics in municipal drinking water in California state? I assume that's yes.
Yes, I know there's a lot of efforts being made to monitor drinking water, and we want to leverage those lessons learned, and especially for sampling and analysis methods, and for our monitoring strategy. And our monitoring strategy is focused on aquatic ecosystems, but we do want to leverage related efforts. So yes.
Okay, Pamela Bond says, can you help to discover any existing monitoring of creeks if we specify the creek and waterway? And will any monitoring be accessible for real-time feedback to share with decision makers if we have a location we are worried about and advocating around? Example, an artificial turf field that is shedding plastic and we know where the storm drain ends up.
So, hi, Pamela. Thank you very much for your question. So, speaking from a kind of more information management standpoint, because that's my background, what we would really want to get out of this, this statewide monitoring strategy and the program that would emerge from it is part of what the subtext of your question is how do we see from the state down to all the way to the local and see what's happening, what monitoring is happening. And I cited the FAIR principles where it's all about findability and accessibility and openness. And so that does factor into how we would be collecting information, sharing information. I don't know exactly where you are, and I don't know what monitoring is happening in that local waterway, or even if it would be available on some kind of statewide map. But that knowing kind of where monitoring is happening, and not just where there are available data, but where monitoring is planned and where it's happening currently, I think that would be within a reasonable understanding of what a program might show. But that's kind of not something as far as the specifics of the type of information that is collected has been spelled out. But it sounds like a reasonable thing moving forward.
Okay. Yeah, and I know that's a good idea, Kylie. Yeah, if folks want to introduce themselves, that would be great. And then the next question is from Samantha. Are you interested in work from organizations working on the monitoring of microplastics in municipal drinking? Whoops, I already read that one. I apologize. Here's the next one. Hello, I am with the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission. If there is a McAteer Petris Act violation, sorry if I messed that up, in the Bay Area, for example, you can report it to BCDC and will be further investigated. So that's an existing avenue if people have concerns about current regulations that are not being complied with. Thanks, Alyssa, for letting people know about that. Okay, there are no hands up. Are there additional questions? Folks are into the typing today versus the talking, which is fine.
I don't know if it made a difference to the audience, but did you want to open up for comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. So questions, comments? Again, if it's substantive, detailed comments, we really want to orient people to go to the document because that's where the commenting can be, most focused. Any other questions or comments? I'm going to leave another awkward minute in case folks are thinking. It's our new reality when we're all online now, the awkward pauses of the virtual world. Okay, so if Tony just added that if the violation is higher in the watershed or not in the Bay Area, then your regional water board would be a good resource for enforcement. That's their job. Okay, we have a hand up. Susan Hinton, you have the floor.
Yes, the more specific the information that you can give when you find something, in other words, not just sort out microplastics by size, but the more you can specifically pin down the chemical nature of what you find, the more useful it'll be overall. Everything I've read leads me to believe and understand that you can't have a small piece of plastic without considering the chemicals that are embedded within it. And that when you have small pieces of plastic with differing combinations of chemicals and they mix together, you can get a really problematic plume of water. And if we can understand some of that as a result of your study, that would be fabulous.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I totally agree. And I certainly recognize that, yes, these plastics contain a whole concoction of different chemicals in there. This was something that I asked our science advisors as to whether we should be, how do we incorporate the chemicals monitoring with the plastics monitoring? And their recommendation was to focus on the microplastics monitoring as the combined monitoring is an area of ongoing research. But looking for opportunities where when we are doing the microplastics monitoring, we can also do related chemicals monitoring.
Okay, thank you. Susan, other comments, other hands? Thank you for the work going into these strategies and monitoring. This is a gargantuan task. Amelia from Clear Oceans International. Thank you, Amelia, for acknowledging what the team was up against. Again, this is a first big step. I believe it's the first one of its kind in the country. So kudos to the team. Got a couple of hearts on that. Still no hands. Anybody else? Okay, here we have a long comment from Terry. Artificial turf blades are a major contributor to microplastics. One regulation-sized field sheds 2,000 to 3,000 microplastic blades a year into watersheds. As mentioned, current research finds 12 to 15% of mesoplastics in the ocean's waterways are from artificial turf microplastic blades. Public comments to DTSC do call attention to this fact. California Coastal Commission doesn't allow artificial turf in the Coastal Commission permit zone due to multiple concerns. Will submit public written comments with further detail. Great, Terry. You're obviously sophisticated in your understanding of the issue, so that's why we encourage folks with that kind of perspective to write stuff down so it will be accurately considered with any revisions and or passed on to any implementers. Okay, any other comments? All right, well, I'd like to say it's very heartening to see this big a turnout for a meeting like this. When you have robust public participation, it's a good indicator. People are concerned, they have their eye on it. Again, this is early and hopefully it's going to go in great directions and you can continue to monitor the monitoring and see where there's additional engagement opportunities in the future. Team, do you have any closing comments?
I'll just say thank you everyone for attending and asking your questions and providing thoughtful comment. We really appreciate it here and are looking forward to reading your written comments as well. And as a reminder, please submit your comments by the deadline, which is March 11th.
Okay, and the link's there if you want to grab it before we adjourn.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, if you have written comments that don't fit the survey, you can email us directly at plastics@sfei.org. So we look forward to your comments, and we will, after the public comment period, we will be summarizing this public comment period to the OPC, and that will be part of our report deliverable.
Okay, thanks again. Concerned citizens are good to see, and agency folks. I know there are some of you out there too. All right, then everybody take care and stay warm. Okay, cheers all.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
We really appreciate it.